Okay, so the kind of the trajectory of my illness has gradually been worsening. I have to measure out my life in teaspoons. So I can't walk, for example, more than a few meters before my legs collapse. Leaving the house, even in a wheelchair, is such a high level activity for me that I can only do it once a fortnight for a couple of hours. So it's a little bit like being on house arrest. So yeah, I miss things. I miss things like going around to a friend's house for dinner, walking alongside my husband rather than being pushed by him. Being able to do stuff with my son. I miss going to church. It's a bit awkward being the vicar's wife who doesn't go to church. Yeah. And I most of all, I miss my freedom and my independence. Well, before I was this ill, I was a Bible teacher, and so I could lecture quite happily in suffering and God and how it all fitted together. But when you are going through something yourself, you can know theology, but there's heart theology. It's really hard to be anything but angry and irritable when you're in a lot of pain. Yes. It's just hard. And so I was kind of like going, I don't know what's going to happen to me. And I want God to be here, but God is silent. And it was worse. The worst point was just after I gave birth. So it was going through labour that kind of pushed my Emmy into the very severe state. And so after I gave birth, I woke up with a new baby and a new disability. I couldn't walk. I couldn't even stand in the early days. I couldn't pick up my baby. So for months I was in bed, just looking up at the ceiling, too exhausted to speak to anyone for more than 30 minutes per day, just having my baby to feed. And then hour after hour, looking up at this beige ceiling, the same colour every day, nothing to do, just this endless time going on and on. And I had this newborn baby who I loved and would have done anything for. And something in me snapped. And I said to God, if I had the power to stop my baby suffering from the way I am now suffering, I would do it. And you have the power and you're not. But there are two things that really helped. And the first was looking at the Bible again with this fresh perspective and discovering there are so many heroes of God who wrestled similarly, who really, really struggled in their faith or with suffering. So I think having permission in that space was huge. And as Christians, we often underestimate the length of time it takes to be able to process and cope with a loss or suffering like this. And I think there are a lot of people who walk away from the faith just because they have no space for that in between the meant that we see so much of in the Psalms and in Job. And the second thing that really helped me was I was listening to Kay Warren talk about her son's suicide. And at one point she says, suffering will come because suffering will come because suffering will come. You can't escape suffering. So do you want, in that midst of suffering, do you want to be with God or do you want to do it without God? Yes. And for me, that was the choice. I wanted God to fix things. But in the face of him not fixing things, I had to say, okay, am I going to do this alone or am I going to do this with God? And I felt just like the disciples who say, well, where do we go?
For those who haven't experienced full physical healing, what kind of things have worked for you and what would you recommend they think about?
Yeah, this is such an interesting topic because I'm kind of a walking, living example of the paradox. So when I was 6 days old, I was rushed to Great Ormond Street Hospital. My parents weren't Christians. I had a brain hemorrhage. The doctors were saying it looks like she's going to die. If she survives, she'll be incredibly disabled. She'll never learn to read or write. All we can suggest is praying. And so my non-Christian parents prayed with a nurse. And the next day, The scans were clear. I was completely better. And even the doctors were saying, this is what we call in the trade a miracle. So I always grew up with that knowledge that God can heal, and yet he doesn't heal me now. So I think the first thing to say is you've got to live in the mystery, and you've got to have a theology that allows that space. The moment you start trying to tie it down too neatly, why God doesn't heal, you either end up blaming God or you're blaming the sick person. So for me, I rejoice in others' healing. Sometimes I also cry, I'll be honest. Like sometimes when I hear of someone else being healed, it is that feeling of, oh, why not me? And what do they do? But I just got to kind of talk myself out of that God doesn't heal people because of their worthiness. I think the crucial thing for me has been to understand that even when you feel exiled, even when you feel like you're in the wilderness, you're alone, and your experience is so different from everyone else's, God has a habit of showing up in the wilderness. He always does.